Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we are very excited to welcome back Sammy Armenia, VP of Corporate Development at C21 Investments. We're excited to spend some time digging into some recent earnings, as well as getting his views on where we are in the macro from a cannabis perspective. We've talked about it time and time again. Cannabis is never boring. There's always something happening, something moving, and always I think it demands some more context and kind of digesting as we go along. So Sammy, really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us and kind of give some insight into.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, so a good reminder before we jump in, I know we're going to start kind of on the earnings side. Sure. If you're out there and joining us, as always, a good reminder, if you have any questions or comments you want to put out there, you're always welcome to do that. It's a great time, I think, to get your questions answered directly. I feel like I've seen a ton of chatter in the world of cannabis lately. A lot of people have some questions in terms of where things are going from a macro perspective. It's a good reminder to get those in if you have them, and we'll get to them as we go along. So with all that said, let's maybe spend some time on the most recent thing, which this week you guys put out earnings, which is very exciting to see. Would love to start with sort of that high level context and highlights there.
Yeah, I mean, we continue to be a bit of an outlier in our market, the Nevada market. We had 4% same source sales growth year over year, continue to generate free cash flow every quarter. The state of Nevada just put out its stats for 2025. It was down 9%. And that the state of Nevada, the way they share their information is it's taxable sales. So it includes retail, but it also includes things like consumption lounges and transfer of assets. So at the retail level, sales are actually down more in the 15%, which is terrible. And obviously, I think we're now 5 or 6 quarters in a row of same-store sales growth. So we're definitely outperforming our market, a bit of an outlier. We had transaction growth in all 3 of our big dispensaries there year over year. So, the trend has been pretty strong for our company. The thing I was most excited about in this period was we really aggressively paid down our short-term liabilities. We are probably one of the cleanest balance sheets in the industry. We are one of the cleanest balance sheets in the industry by far. I think we only have $6 million in short-term liabilities now, and most of those are things that we are aggressively paying down. The debenture principal retires this year. We pay that monthly. Some other short-term obligations. We've been aggressively paying down tax. We paid almost $2 million year to date in current tax. So we're really trying to just keep our company really clean. There's so much distress in the industry, right? We're trying to be a bit of an outlier on that front. As we all wait for, the bigger, broader material change to the industry. Nevada's not without its challenges. There's a ton of pricing pressure that affected gross margin in the quarter. Definitely there's some seasonality in that kind of October to December period, both around the Thanksgiving, Christmas kind of holiday sales. You got to keep up with the competitors, and there's a lot of aggressive pricing that happens in those kind of holiday periods. And end of year, there's a lot of blowout of inventory and stuff like that. So it definitely puts a strain. We also see that in the 420, around the 420, it's the same type of thing. But beyond that, there's still supply issues in a lot of these markets. And when you have distressed operators, especially on the cultivation side of things, they don't sell for profit. They sell because they have to sell to keep the lights on, and that really tends to strain these markets. And without an organic growth channel for the industry, the way we've all been handcuffed for years now, essentially with 280E, but also with the siphoning off of growth, let's call it, with the illicit market. We all, the illicit market really has been the intoxicating hemp market for the most part. But that's really taken, this industry doesn't have a growth problem, right? Because the growth has been there. The hemp market grew to 20+ billion seemingly overnight. But it's just been channeled into the, we can call it the illicit market, because really it's not legal cannabis. It's taken advantage of the loophole, which we've discussed before. and that loophole has 9 months left. The clock is ticking on that closing. Let's hope that they get aggressive with enforcement, or at least merge the two markets, so that the hemp market has to be licensed and tested and taxed and regulated the way that state legal markets have to. That's ultimately probably where this will shake out, but nobody knows for sure. I know there's obviously a lot of pushback from the hemp companies on this big change coming at the end of this year. We're also in an election cycle with the midterms this year, so that's going to dominate the headlines. The elephant in the room, obviously, is when does rescheduling cross final rule finish line, and the chatter has obviously taken a bearish tone, with price falling in the sector. Ian Castle, who's not a cannabis person, although I think he might be invested in some cannabis companies, he's a microcap investor that has a big following. He put out this phenomenal piece a couple of weeks ago about how when prices go up, everyone uses a telescope to kind of justify price. They look so far out in the future at the hope and the growth of the future. And when prices go down, everybody uses a microscope to qualify why these companies are here. And I feel like even though that piece wasn't about cannabis, it replies so directly to our sector. If you think of how the narrative shifted from 5 years, we just passed 2 days ago, we passed the 5-year all-time high, February 10th, 2021. And so if you look at where the multiples were in the sector at the time, we're talking about 15 times sales, 75 times EBITDA on average in the sector, with the hope that there was massive growth to come with new states coming online, with adoption, and we know how that ended up playing out. And so, now you're in a world where it's kind of 1 time sales, 5 times EBITDA, and everybody says, well, it deserves to be here because the growth didn't happen, or, these companies have had self-inflicted problems with over-leveraging their balance sheets. And there's just kind of a blanket on everybody that we all suck. And, the reality is C21 has less shares out now than 5 years ago. So the screaming, somebody commented when I put this out the other day, the comparative of the 2 periods, oh, dilution. And it's like, well, we haven't diluted at all. So that's not, the leverage, the over leveraging of the balance sheet. Well, we paid off all our debt. Like we don't have any. So, why are we at near, lows? Because sentiment drives price action and narrative drives price action, especially in this sector, because we have such a deficient market with the custody challenges that we have, which really aggressively picked up after all-time highs, with a bunch of large funds that were tapped out, that were forced out by compliance, and then you had a bunch of the broker dealers and the prime brokers forced out of custodying cannabis. We know why we're here. They haven't come back. There is some hope that rescheduling obviously changes, the need for these companies to have to file the SARS, the suspicious activity reports, on every cannabis trade that they do, and hopefully they become comfortable. There's also hope that uplisting will finally have a path once rescheduling happens, because there's less concern about the industry. So there's a ton going on, and yet it always seems like we're in a hurry up and wait period in the industry. December 18th was the executive order. Everybody kind of felt like a month was going to be the timeline. We passed that, and now there's concern with when does final rule get signed, and the clock starts for the 30-day period, and then there's concern that the prohibitionists are going to file lawsuits, and how much is that going to delay the inevitability of this becoming law. Speaking of the prohibitionists, we saw what was a hit piece in the New York Times editorial board the other day that is really taking over the narrative of the industry over the last few days, with a ton of conservative influencers kind of reposting it on X, and all claiming that cannabis is the devil's lettuce again. Crazy reefer madness everywhere.
Mhm.
Hirsch Jane, who's a phenomenal follow in the industry, one of the brightest minds in the space, one of the most knowledgeable, educated people around policy, around state level reform and stuff. He did a phenomenal piece in Todd's Cannabis Confidential that everybody should read, where he, point by point, was a takedown of the narrative that the New York Times piece had. So I encourage everybody to read that. And when you think about where we are in terms of, I even saw some people say, well, maybe they're all coming out now against this because something's changed at the administrative, with the administration and how they feel. What has happened? A couple of weeks ago, the White House put out its list of accomplishments, and rescheduling cannabis was one of them.
Mhm.
And in the last 2 weeks, we had a piece in the New York Post that said that brain health in middle age and seniors, actually brain volume increases with regular cannabis use. That was a study that was published. Seemed to kind of slip under the radar, and now this New York Times narrative is taking over, and it's like, well, there was no new study to support the New York Times piece, right? It's all based on fallacies. But there was, that new study, and then Boston University had a new study, I think that just came out today, that opioid use is down double digits in states that legalize, and it was a pretty substantial study. Again, this is the knowledge that the administration needs, that the public needs, that this is a efficacious drug that is helping communities. It on a variety of fronts. Economically, it helps states with taxes. It helps with jobs. But there's a lot. We almost forget that the HHS published a 252-page binding research, right? That cannabis has medical value. So the idea that the New York Times completely ignored it in their piece, they don't even mention it, right? They
Yeah.
just pick and choose which pieces of information they want to skew to make their argument, and it's all nonsense. But this is where we're at, and the longer that there's uncertainty or pause in getting reform passed across the finish line. The other bearish narrative that happens, that's more on the fundamental front of things, is that, well, rescheduling doesn't matter because these cannabis companies aren't paying their 280E, or they stopped paying their 280 in the last few years. I mean, even Green Thumb, who was the one company that continued to pay, they stopped in 2025. So really, the argument is that, well, none of these companies are paying their 280E provision. So when rescheduling passes and 280E is repealed, nothing really changes. But it's just false. There's a whole host of reasons why rescheduling matters to the fundamentals of these companies. First and foremost, 70% of the index of the ETF in the space, the large ETF in the space, will flip to positive earnings per share. So 70% of the weighting of the basket currently has earnings before tax. And the reason they all end up showing net loss instead of net profit is because the 280 tax provision is on the gross profit line, not on the earnings before tax line. Once 280 is repealed on rescheduling to 3, you're talking about 7 companies that represent 70% of the weight instantly become profitable. C21 has had 4 or 5, maybe 6 quarters in a row now of earnings before tax. So all of those quarters without 280 are profitable quarters. When you start to hope for outside investment, institutional investment into the space, there is no more important line on the income statement than net earnings, right? Net profit. And this industry hasn't been investable because it's not profitable, and that's going to change overnight. So whether or not these companies have been conserving their cash by not paying it doesn't change the fact that there's a massive change to the income statement on rescheduling. So that's one important point. The cost of capital, right, is going to be different under Schedule 3 than it currently is. So lowering the cost of capital, lowering the cost of interest to carry the debt that's in this space, or being able to refinance at lower rates, very important. It will pause the current accrual of uncertain tax provisions that most of these companies have right now. And part of the problem is, as people stare at these balance sheets, they see a ever-growing uncertain tax provision for the 280E that's not being paid. Once we can stop the clock on that, it's important, because right now it's kind of a runaway train. There is a lot of hope that there's going to be a clawback of what is owed to potentially to 2023, when provisional rule happened and the HHS published the data to support medical efficacy of cannabis. You can't claim that these companies owe a 280E when the entire clause of 280E is that these have no medical value, medical purpose. The U.S. government stated it has medical value in 2023. So, and that's binding science. They can't change that. So the idea that there could be a major clawback on that, some even suggest the clawback may be further for medical. But regardless, that would be a substantial change to the current liabilities in the sector. Okay, so there's that, and the ability to lower the stigma of the plant, right, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, where it becomes more accepted. You're going to see more, obviously more research, which we all hope for, to show potential benefits in a variety of indications, right? So as more and more people feel comfortable to try cannabis as an alternative to alcohol, to opioids, to a variety of things, that's going to increase the potential for organic growth. Credit cards, huge thing that right now we're all credit cards are not allowed in current state legal cannabis dispensaries. So the ability for the major credit cards to be used, as we all know, you can only spend what you have in your pocket. If you go into a dispensary, it's very different. I'm sure when you're buying things, if you can use your credit card, you tend to spend more, right? So basket size has really struggled, even though transaction growth and unit growth is there in the sector in most markets. The basket size has really come down, 25% or more in a lot of markets, because people can only spend what they have, and people have less discretionary, capital, because the cost of living has gone up dramatically over the last 5 years with increase in interest rates and, cost of food, cost of gas, cost of everything, right? So all of these things come together, and the idea that there's only one benefit to 280 going away, and that's not really a benefit, so therefore rescheduling doesn't matter. It's just it's a simplified and incorrect take. There's the idea of state reform reigniting. We just saw Wyoming yesterday, I think, filed a bipartisan bill that they want to reschedule to 3 to follow kind of the federal direction. Mississippi, a couple other kind of currently prohibitionist states have also filed bills like that. As we get, we know Pennsylvania will probably move pretty aggressively once it's a Schedule 3 drug. Hopefully Florida can, get there in the next, well, hopefully this year, but if not this year, in the 28 cycle. Texas has now seemingly opened up. They added licenses. A few of the multi-state operators received those licenses. So that's a massive market, second largest market in the U.S. that will open up. Obviously, we know the stories of what's happened with hemp in Texas, where it's become a massive industry, and they're trying to manage how they deal with that. But the ability for state legal to exist in Texas, at least at the medical level, in a more profound way. It's been a very restricted program. So that's huge. And then the other thing that's going to happen is consolidation is going to be dramatic, and it's already started. I'm sure people are noticing that M&A is really starting to pick up. It's going to accelerate from here on out. Whether or not we see final rule, today, tomorrow, next week, next month, I think the M&A acceleration is going to happen regardless. But as companies potentially get a currency back with their the public companies with their stocks assuming that we get final rule and there's a lift on, a re-rate on the multiples of the space, there's going to be aggressive consolidation in the sector. And that happens in every new sector. This isn't something that's unique to cannabis, but it's time. And every industry as it matures, it ends up being, a handful of huge companies that basically, own those industries, and cannabis is going to be no different. You can look to alcohol as to what type of model it's going to end up probably looking like. And so consolidation, although inorganic growth can be very accretive, if the big companies buy accretive assets, it can really, drive massive growth. And then you have the synergies that come with M&A, right? If you are a big multi-state operator and you acquire a company in one of your states that maybe is a leading operator, they can bring significant synergies to your market there. And how you I just listed 10 things off the top of my head, but how you quantify all of this into what does this mean for the valuations of the sector? It's almost impossible, right? We don't know the timing of anything. We don't know what the structure is going to be. The bears would argue they're likely going to put an excise tax on cannabis. So will some of those savings from 280 being repealed have to go to a kind of federal excise tax? We don't know how any of it's going to play out. Therefore, it makes it virtually impossible to kind of underwrite, and then with Schedule 1, there's so much risk. Institutional capital can't even touch it. They can't custody it. So you're left to, retail or high net worth, family offices, small hedge funds, things like that are the only people that can potentially even invest in the space as it is right now. It's no wonder why we are where we are, right? And we're all waiting for that kind of switch to flip, but nobody can predict the timing, and nobody can predict how fast the acceleration is of all of those potential catalysts to come. And I haven't even mentioned something like safe banking, because that depends on Congress, and as Congress is a disaster, so I'm not even going to go there.
That is fair enough. Well, I feel like I have so much more clarity, but also as you've been talking, which has been great, I feel like questions keep popping up. So I feel like I have some to work through, but I also am seeing some in the comments, which is great. But
I'm here.
I think that's a great overview in terms of, C21, its footprint, how things are going, and then kind of, where we are from where we stand basically from now. I think it is that same story of we have a set of dominoes, a very clear path in terms of what the knock-on effects could be or will be. And again, just need that first one really to tip. I think it is one of those things also too, where, last year I feel like so much of the conversation was, do we get this executive order? I understand the frustration on the timing from that last year, because I think it was, early that Trump had said, it's coming next week or something effectively like that. We did end up getting it, of course, and I think that was great to get it in that year. It's a great, important first step. But I think we're kind of in a similar thing with the kind of second half of that.
I agree completely. Right. I mean, that happened in August. He said in a few weeks. We didn't get it until December 18th. And so you start to extrapolate, what does that mean for, well, we'll get it in 30 days or end of January. And it's like, well, that's not exactly how these things work. They're juggling a million priorities right now. Every day seems to be a fire to put out in US politics. So, what we're hearing through the grapevine is that it's a priority, and it's on the docket to reach final rule and be on the Federal Register. But until it's there, it's just a waiting game.
Yeah, it's true. I think even like what you're mentioning before with sort of the, Trump putting forward the list of things that he's gotten done. I think it's very easy when there's no real news or information just yet to read that as, does he view it as basically done and he's not going to do anything beyond it? Or do people view it as, he sees the path, he knows where it's going to go, and he knows it's going to get done. So it's sort of, he's adding it kind of preemptively.
We don't kill her.
I know. It really is. But again, I think even in okay.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and then you have the market structural issues, right? The deficient market structural issues without that institutional incremental buyer. The algos that exist in these stocks are just relentless. They're predatory. They push down on every name. because it's easier to move stocks down than it is to move them up. And, it's essentially naked shorting, and they're exempt because market makers can do these things. And it's constant pressure on these stocks. It is not indicative of, algorithms are not doing fundamental math on where they think a stock should be, right? It's just they're clipping pennies off of these stocks every day. It's unfortunate. It's how the markets work. This isn't just a cannabis thing. This is an everything thing. It's the reason it is so unique or so punitive to cannabis is because cannabis doesn't have access to the broader investment pool that most markets have.
Yeah.
And that's really the challenge we face.
Yeah, but also the opportunity in terms of the unlock when you get to the other side of things. But yes, ultimately that
Correct.
makes a lot of sense.
Stop
all right,
being glass half full there, Mackenzie.
glass is midway full. We'll have to see if it
no.
gets low. Okay, let me see. I'll work through some of these questions and comments.
Okay.
Mitch has a good point of saying, haven't seen something not become law. That is true. Sometimes, obviously, things don't happen or they fall through the cracks. I think that is the uncertainty we're speaking to. But again, I think having the industry communicating with them is hopefully that push and pressure to keep it moving along. But yeah, I think definitely, things do fall through the cracks sometimes, but hopefully that is not cannabis. It is something that is continually important for people from a medical perspective, from even just a recreational fun perspective versus alcohol. You talked about how sort of the gray market has, overtaken states like Texas. I think that is just people want it, and it is.
It's the sad part of the prohibitionist argument right now, is that they're taking a lot of the negative effects of the illicit market and what it's doing, and they're applying that to the state legal market and it's so unfortunate, right? Because age gating is the first step to a regulated state legal market, and if minors shouldn't be using cannabis, and if they are, they're not getting it from state legal cannabis dispensaries, right? So it's like, the more you keep this as a Schedule 1 drug, the more you allow the illicit market to kind of, succeed, the more you're going to have these problems. And we are an overtaxed, overregulated space, and they are not. So we can't compete on price, and it's there's again, go to Hirsch's. Hirsch takes down the New York Times editorial piece like point by point to perfection. He's unbelievable with that, with his ability to kind of articulate these things. So please read it.
Yeah, we'll do. That's fantastic. Out of curiosity, in terms of, I feel like there had been conversations last year around prohibitionists, I think Sam and all of that sort of picking up around the time that the executive order was kind of getting done and moving to process. What's your take in terms of what we're seeing now? Is that sort of like history rhyming, nothing, any sort of connection?
We don't know, but I had this conversation yesterday with an investor, right? It's like, is it, the noise that's picked up over the last few days, is it indicative that we're close to final rule and they're trying to get, the messaging in front of it? Or are they doing a final push to try to, change the outcome? It's hard to know. It's, we've seen this before with Sam specifically, as you said. So it's likely that they're just following the same playbook, but time's going to tell ultimately.
That's fair. All right, getting a lot of questions that are coming through. So let me see if I can pop them in. One that I'm seeing most recently from Brian is saying, I'm impressed with C21's financials, but not invested currently due to the size. What plans do you have for growth? Out of curiosity. So I feel like that's always a conversation, but again.
No, there's two paths to growth, right? There's organic growth, which has been really challenging for the industry. I had mentioned earlier when we started, we're probably one of the only companies that's had consistent organic growth, same-store sales growth over the last 4, 5, 6 quarters. And so, that's been the growth that we've shown. Ultimately, same-store sales growth is growth in existing stores that have been open for 12 months or longer. So most of the tier ones saw mid-single-digit decline in same-store sales growth, in same-store sales, I should say, in the last quarter they reported. So it's, there's a bit of a compression issue happening, obviously, in the industry. And to mitigate that, you usually see inorganic growth, which is M&A, and or new states unlock, right? Like Minnesota, things like that. Virginia is likely going to become an adult use market in 2026. That's going to help a whole bunch of companies that have big footprints there. So, for C21 specifically, we're going to continue to do what we've been doing. It's successful. We're going to try to continue to, add our retail footprint, because that's ultimately our model. And then you're always open to the broader strategic conversations of, mergers and things like that, because ultimately that's what, where the industry is going to head. So, if there's ever, a deal for us to do that's good for our shareholders, we're going to weigh that seriously, obviously. So, I mean, you're constantly weighing both paths, right? What can we do to grow organically? What can we do to increase our footprint in Nevada? And what can we do strategically to become bigger, right? And those are it's what I spend all my time on, right? Is weighing those paths and having conversations around that stuff. Obviously, we can't share any details on what conversations are happening. I can say, I talked to a lot of bankers, a lot of people in the space, advisors, things like that. There's a lot of chatter right now in the industry around M&A picking up. So
Yeah.
I expect to see a big surge in M&A moving forward in 2026.
I do see a question on that, which I'll pull up, but I would say ultimately also, I think, big and bad, I feel like you can find companies that aren't necessarily performing in the same way, isn't necessarily the trade-off you want to make. I think most people, when they're looking at cannabis, have different exposures and, a different balance and blend of kind of where they have it. So I think size shouldn't be an exclusively limiting factor. I think, having a strong company.
It shouldn't at all. Some of the best performing cannabis companies have been the smaller ones over the last 5 years, right? Like including us, relative to everybody else, right? So it's, size doesn't mean therefore your stock's going to go up more.
Yeah.
It's just not how it works. It's all about, how much value are you building as a company? And I think we've done, arguably one of the better jobs in the industry over the last 5 years in retaining and trying to build value by, being very careful with our cap table, with not issuing shares, with paying down debt, like everything we can do to build equity value. We've tried. We have active share buybacks as well. So it's another, tool that these companies have, especially the ones that generate free cash like we do. So you can only control what you can control, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. But I think in terms of, opportunities, it's still, one ultimately that you touched on, which is great. Jake was, I think, not joking, but kind of joking. I know you can't speak to this exactly, but saying, would love to be a buyout acquisition target potentially. Because again, having that great balance sheet, having that good footprint makes a difference. I know you can't speak. I'm guessing.
Can't comment. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, let me see. Here we go. I'm going to throw up some more from WEB Doobie, which is, again, great screen name. Happy Thursday. With 280E potentially gone, does C21 shift towards being a consolidator, and what states would you look at?
It's a good question. I would say our chief near-term objective is to increase our footprint in Nevada. It's where we generate the most value. When you take, even under rescheduling, even under Schedule 3, we still have this state silo program, right? Where each state has to have its own, vertical, and, there's no interstate sales, right? So the idea that you're going to go open up in a new state and try to replicate what you built in existing states, we've seen that model fail so many times in the industry, right? Like so many times. And I don't know, off the top of my head, I can't think of one that's been successful to build accretive value for the existing business. We saw a lot of tier 3s, smaller tier 2s expand into a variety of states over the last 5 years. And although they had a top line, increase, it really affected their profitability, because it's hard. It's hard to take your home market and kind of replicate that in other markets. So I would say our chief near-term focus would just be to continue to do what we've been doing, which is trying to increase our footprint in the state, because that opportunity is still present. I think we're 5% of the sales in Nevada. Why not try to be 10% of the sales in Nevada? That's probably an easier path, also probably less capital intensive to grow that way than it would be to kind of, either acquire a new state or try to, get a license in a new state and build. We just saw one of the peers in Nevada just announced this morning they exited California. So they were a single state Nevada operator, right? And they went and tried California, tried Florida, tried Illinois, and were very profitable when they were single state Nevada, and are very unprofitable now. And you kind of say, was that successful in building value for their shareholders, right? And so you have to be very careful. You can't take a swing at these things. The capital isn't there in this sector to kind of be frivolous with, let's try, and if it doesn't work, oh well. You have to measure 10 times before you can even take one shot at these things, because you can't be wrong.
Yeah.
We were trying to add, we added a store 2 years ago, but we were trying to add, to our retail footprint in Nevada for a long time, right? But you have to get it right. So fortunately, we got it very right with our South Reno store, which is just phenomenal. But
yeah, I would say
how you
even
build value. That's how you build value, right? We paid $3 million. The store has gone up substantially in sales from when we acquired it. So I can't even tell you how much. It's exceptional. So
yeah, I think that sort of measure twice, cut once, sort of in
yeah.
terms of acquisition makes a big difference in terms of not having to repivot, and that can be important too, but more costly, I think, to make that mistake and kind of pull back from it. WDB stole my next question, which was talking about within the state. Even I think there are decisions in terms of footprint and where you want to be. I know Vegas for a long time has been very difficult, especially
It's been on our radar forever. What the degradation of the Vegas market due to intoxicating hemp has been. We've talked about it in previous times you've had me on. It's been dramatic. I mean, I can't even begin to describe to you what's happened. And ultimately, they allowed intoxicating hemp on the Strip, service the casinos, service the hotels, and the state legal cannabis operators have been, boxed out of that from day one. You can't compete with that. So, Clark County, which is the Vegas county, has put out a proposal for law to seriously, rein in intoxicating hemp. It's a comprehensive bill. I think it would be effective if they get there. These things take time, but we don't stop, paying attention to it. I think if that market shifts, if they get the runaway train, under wrap, we would be very interested in pursuing that market for sure.
Interesting. So even outside of a state sort of control over the hemp side of things, intoxicating hemp side of things, how much would sort of the limited runway for intoxicating hemp from the loophole closing come into play too? Is that, how much does that matter versus just the individual state cracking down on intoxicating hemp in Vegas?
I think ultimately the federal ban is going to have to be implemented by the states, right? Sure. I mean, they if they just turn a blind eye, and I don't think they will. Okay. Right. I think it's going to very much be the reason that these states have to get aggressive on cracking down. Okay, and there was an article in the Vegas Sun 2 days ago, the same article that had the 9% decline in sales, talked about, they have two studies the Cannabis Compliance Board in Nevada has two studies right now on the impact of intoxicating hemp in the illicit market. And they are very much aware that this is, because ultimately it's affecting their tax revenue, right? And they pay for education and all sorts of things in that state with that revenue. So it's very important to them to figure out where did this go. They're very behind the wheel on this one. Like that, it was evident a while ago. There's companies that there's privates that I would have talked to in Vegas years ago that were doing let's call it 15 million in sales that are now doing 6. And it's not that their business isn't as good as it was. It's that they let a mess happen in that market. So
fair enough.
It's unfortunate. And if they do kind of correct it, I think there'll be a huge move back to Vegas probably, or at least interest in that market again. Yeah.
No, I think it makes sense. Speaking of also footprint, Skip's got a great question, which is, do you have any thought or interest in Elko, which is in Nevada as well? Are those potatoes too small? Appreciate your time today. I'm sure you're looking at a bunch of different places. Has that hit?
Yeah, I can't talk about individual, assets or individual, whether public or private. I mean, we can't get into the granular details on what conversations you have. We are, broad blanket statement, we will have a conversation with every and any asset that we think is, potentially accretive to our business, right? Like that,
Yeah.
that's
That's
full
it.
stop. Full
Yeah,
stop.
I think that makes sense. Also, yeah, Brian's saying thanks for the response. That's great. I feel like, again, getting a lot of great questions. So appreciate, I feel like it speaks to, I saw Janon and everyone, I feel like speaks to being out there as someone who is knowledgeable about the space and communicating a lot. So appreciate that as well. Let me see. WEB is now saying, I didn't see this. The FDA had commented on the New York Times article this morning. I didn't see that.
I didn't
I'll
see it.
check and
I may have
see.
missed it. Yeah.
But that's interesting. Would be curious to see how that goes. And then, of course, the timing question. Jake, can't blame you. Do we get a final rule before June? Crazy it's taking so long. Definitely agree on the crazy it's taking so long part of it. Hard to
Yes.
guess timing.
Impossible to, I had an inbound that's investor said, hearing through the grapevine that it's imminent. Can you confirm that it's imminent? And it's like, how can I confirm that?
Yeah.
Nobody can, right?
Okay.
We don't know. There's no way of us knowing.
Yeah. Fair
And
enough.
if we did know, we probably wouldn't be able to say it. So
True. But either way, I think it's being prepared for when that
yeah,
change happens to take advantage of things, which makes sense.
yeah.
WB was following up on that comment on responding to the New York Times article, saying on Fox Business this morning and commented on Schedule 3 in the executive order. Seems the admin is preparing,
Yeah.
which is great.
And that's
Great to
what we're hearing, right?
Okay.
Through the sources that are available, that seem to be tuned in or tapped into the administration, that they're in the process of preparing final
Interesting.
rule.
Is
But
that
does
just
that
talking
mean?
with other operators and sort of just getting a sense of what they're hearing from the administration? Or I don't know if you can reveal it,
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they're trustworthy
Yeah.
sources, but that's what we are hearing. But
Cool.
what is that? It doesn't, what can I get with that?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it
Nope.
doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's fair.
Speculate. I know the speculation is important to the investor, especially our small investor community, because they're trying to time this, especially if people have either, taken a bet and they're underwater on it, or they have exited and they're waiting to re-enter to try to capture the move, right? But it's, we can't time this stuff. Or having the ability to play the market with insider information is not, what any cannabis company wants to be part of. So at least
Extremely
any
fair.
respectable company wants to be part of, right? Like this is not, and it's not where our focus should be at all.
Yes.
So
I think, yeah, looking at the larger trend in terms of we hope that it's moving that way. I think, again, even just looking at last year, if you had kind of invested over the year versus when kind of the chaos of the executive order was happening,
sure.
the extreme run-ups and rundowns that you would see make it very
Yeah.
difficult to get that timing exactly right versus, again, over a longer time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Getting another.
and I get that there's exhaustion, like the investor group that's in the space. I have a ton of empathy for everybody and anybody that's been invested. I've been heavily invested in the space for 7 years. So it's painful. It's torture. I get it.
Yeah.
We all wish we could change, the trajectory, the outcomes, but ultimately, we can only control what we can control, which is usually at the company level,
Yeah.
how we, manage the headwinds that we face.
Yeah, that's true. It is, I think, coming at an interesting time if we do see this important change happen, because I do think that just sort of more broadly in the market, I think investors are looking for new areas, new pockets.
Yeah,
And
it's a massive
rotation
flight
of
to safety right now,
Yeah.
right? Rotation to consumer staples, like you're seeing all-time highs in things like Walmart and stuff, while the software companies are getting obliterated, right? Like it's a massive shift happening right now.
Yeah.
Flight to safety, because there's so much uncertainty, geopolitical, uncertainty as to, and blue chip is always going to win in those environments, always.
Yeah, that's true. And I think having that more durable element
What's
of
unfortunate, yeah, but what's unfortunate is cannabis as vice, if you put it in the category, even if it's a healthier vice, if you put it in that category, traditionally, alcohol, tobacco do very well in these types of economic times. In cannabis, unfortunately, because we are boxed out of custody and stuff, we're not seeing that. The big alcohol companies are up like 20% year to date. And we know from, financials that they're all, decimated in sales and really struggling to grow and keep their existing consumer, as the consumer, or at least some of the consumer shifts from alcohol to cannabis, right? Like they're losing out, and yet they're all up 20% because there's a rotation to safety. consumer staples. So, and Vice has always been one of those things that does really well in these types of environments. So it's unfortunate that we don't have access to that right now.
That is true historically. But again, I think there's still, it feels like and seems like, I can't predict the future. There's going to be a continued maybe amount of uncertainty throughout the year. We'll see. So I don't think that trend is necessarily missed. We'll have to wait and see.
Money is always trying to find the next opportunity, right? That's the way the markets work, right? The crypto trade was the trade, the AI trade was the trade. Now they're not the hot trades anymore, and it's always moving around. And ultimately, if cannabis gets the to your point, the dominoes start to fall, and we start to see the structural material changes to the industry that matter to the fundamentals, money will find cannabis, right? It will absolutely find cannabis. It may take time, and it may take time for the structural deficiencies to change. But ultimately, once institutional capital can participate, and like I said, 70% of these companies are profitable, like it's going to become an investable industry and money will come to it. So unfortunately, we've all waited, so many years, and it's like, you're telling me I have to wait longer, but you can't.
But hopefully not much more longer. We'll see.
Again, time the markets.
Yeah, that's true. It's tough. Okay, so I know we're getting closer. I did see a question coming in from RD, which I did want to touch on. So thanks for the question. Will C21 be able to sell CBD into the Medicare system? So talking about the pilot. Yeah.
I hope so. I don't know. I do know that years and years ago, we had launched a CBD line when hemp was legalized under the Farm Bill. We launched an in-house line, and the Nevada compliance made us stop. So the state legal cannabis, at least in Nevada, I don't know if every state has their own rules around this. The state legal cannabis operators were not allowed to in Nevada. But that likely changes with rescheduling and the pilot program and all that, right? It's just these rules have to change. Once they're codified in law, they have to change, and so you're always kind of waiting for those changes to happen before you can implement something like that.
Yeah, but always aware of it.
We have done it before, and we would absolutely be interested in doing it again.
Okay, very cool. Well answered. Hopefully that was a great answer to a good question. I hope, Brian, that things will.
Hope so, Brian.
I know, fingers crossed. All right, well then, as we're sort of rounding out, I know you've been, again, working in this industry, working for a long time, and really been able to deliver a lot of insight to people. I really appreciate you being, I know social media can get a bad rap sometimes, but being out there and really kind of talking with people and sharing your insight, I think it makes a big difference, especially as we're kind of at this pivotal point in cannabis, where hopefully we're kind of entering that next chapter.
And look, I have days too, Mackenzie, where I'm like, I see the bear argument for the entire day, and I could spend an hour on here kind of talking about why I'm concerned or worried, right? Like it weighs on all of us, right? Every operator in the industry, every employee, we feel this. You wouldn't be human if you didn't. So it's not easy to wake up every day and, as Todd likes to say, get punched in the face. But sure. Apologies, inbounds. But yes, it's. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the thesis has not played out. That thesis is still in front of us, and that we can say we were wrong because we were way too early. But ultimately, we didn't. I don't think we appreciated back in 2018, 2019 how dependent the industry was going to be on politicians to deliver, the reform necessary to allow this industry to be a normal industry. Yeah, we didn't appreciate, how complex this path was going to be, and we're here now. So moving forward, we're a heck of a lot closer now than we've ever been, right? I mean, we had the president of the United States issue an executive order to reschedule cannabis. Like, this is game changer for the industry. So let's hope we see it to the finish line, and we can, see that as the first step to this industry, being legitimized and kind of, move forward from here.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting and interesting time. So again, really, really appreciate you spending the time with us. We've almost taken up a full hour, which is great. I feel like you
Sorry.
No, it's great. Packed a ton in, and it's always great to have you on. Really appreciate it. I think great to kind of dig into, of course, C21 itself, but then kind of where things are, because I think it is a moment where people are really hungry for insight, information, a sense of where things could play out. So appreciate you spending some time to give us some great insight there. All
Thanks
right.
for
Well, I'll
having
let
me,
you have the rest
Mackenzie.
of your day, and you're working hard all the time.
Next time we
So
talk, I'm going to be 50, Mackenzie. So I'm
how
struggling with that coming here.
that's big. How are you going to celebrate? What are you going to do? Do you
Don't know
know?
yet. No, I
I
don't
do
know
know
yet.
they make I think they sell them out here. I wonder if they sell them out by you. They have it's like pre-roll, basically candles. It's like a themed
That'd be
cannabis
fun.
candle cake. So you could do a cannabis
Yeah,
birthday
yeah.
cake and then a normal one or something. But yeah, no, I think yeah, 50 is a big milestone and
It's a
happy
big
almost
one.
birthday.
This one hurts. This one hurts for the
Oh,
first time. Yeah.
luckily
Yeah.
cannabis can soothe a little bit of that hurt, I guess, to some
That's
degree.
I'm gonna be leaning on it heavily for that.
It
Yes.
all ties together. Well, happy early birthday. Really
Cheers.
appreciate it
Thank you.
again very much. Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate the questions, comments, and thanks for being here. Thanks. Catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.